On behalf of the African Studies Center and the Department of French at UCLA, I am very happy to welcome Mr. Janheinz Jahn, our distinguished lecturer of this evening. Mr. Jahn, who is a social anthropologist and a graduate of the universities of Munich in Germany and Perugia in Italy, is presently the brilliant animator of the Research Center of Neo-African Culture near Frankfurt in Germany, a center which he founded himself in 1960 and which he privately finances. Mr. Janheinz Jahn's interest in Africa goes further back into the past. Not only has he traveled often in Africa, but he was in 1957 the co-founder of the well-known Nigerian periodical Black Orpheus, which is devoted to the African and Afro-American literatures. Until 1960, he remained the co-editor of that same periodical. Mr. Jahn is the author of several important books on Africa, the most famous of which being, of course, Muntu, which constitutes a major contribution to the understanding of the emerging new African culture. His writings have already designed him as a brilliant specialist on African art, and it will be a pleasure indeed to listen to him speak on that subject, especially that Mr. Jahn has warned me that his ideas will be quite revolutionary. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jahn.
Ladies and gentlemen, the subject of tonight is that all right?
Yes.
So, the subject of tonight being African art, we have first to ask ourselves, what is African art? And I have it first to give a small history of what was thought about African art. Up to the beginning of this century, African traditional art was considered as a curiosity, not as art. The change took place in the beginning of this century when artists, especially in France, began to be interested in overseas sculptures and took influences from them, merely interested in form, not in the analysis of this art. With the reversal of the evolutionary theory, especially through Leo Frobenius and Oswald Spengler, when the decay theory came, the African art and African traditional expressions were glorified as being expressions of a paradise of the past, looking into our age of modern decay. Karl Einstein in 1921 wrote a book about African art, believing that as Africans worship wood, they will have an enormous expression in wood. The German Expressionism at that time reflected itself in the analysis of African art. Since then, theories about what is African art were lacking. Done away with the old theories, more recent research has tried to go deep into detail. Especially the British and American School of Anthropologists have tried to place and to locate African art as precise as possible. William Fagg, the director of the African department of the British Museum in London, has shown how African art can be precisely localized. He will not only say this or that sculpture is Yoruba, he will say it's Yoruba from Abeokuta, and from precisely the place where it came from, and dating it to a certain family of carvers, even giving the individual who carved it. This is very remarkable and is a basis on which to go on in the analysis of African art. Nevertheless, still, the most publications about African art, and there are many, especially with excellent illustrations, group African art according to tribes, and it is still believed that that is the only way of grouping them. The analysis mostly is lacking. That means the meaning of African art is not given. We have more or less descriptive notions linked with it. So Gluck, in one of his last publications, said Benin art, the art of Benin, is classical, and that of the Cameroon grasslands is Baroque. Remarks like this do not help very much in the analysis of African art because it remains in the description, linking it up in comparison with something Western. It was believed, and still is believed in some circles of those who should describe African art, that all human art would try to represent as naturalistic as possible the human body, and as sub-Saharan African art is not naturalistic, it would be because Africans just cannot do any better. We have, therefore, to question what at first our preliminaries about African art and what we think of art in general. In recent times, we have excellent books about African art, dealing especially with the details of environment of it, without the attempt to generalize about it. And generalizing is generally considered as a crime, and I know it. But what I'm going to do today is just generalizing. Certainly, generalizations can be of danger. So, Professor Blossfeld in Germany some years ago wrote a book about African art, trying and believing that just forms as such have a meaning, that a globe means harmony, that a pole means something phallic. And he tried from this aspect to analyze African art and to generalize about it, and it was a disaster. He ended up with remarks which had no relation at all to any kind of art in the world. It's a very valuable attempt because it shows where we end if we generalize from universal beliefs. Now, what can be done and how can we get a step ahead? You will see when we show here these slides that always two slides will be on the screen. In most cases, the two sculptures or masks which you will see are from completely different areas, and I shall speak about them as if it is just one sculpture. That is the generalization. I think that art is only to be analyzed when we try to see it from the African side, when we try to base our analysis on the African value system. In the lecture last night and in some other coming lectures, I will speak in detail about African value system. So I do not need to do it here. I only say a few things about it as far as it's just necessary for understanding art. But I can do that during the slides will be shown. In sub-Saharan Africa, wherever we have art, African art, art is something different than in the Western world. In the Western world, art is an object. We have museums for art. We can store art there. We can look at art detachedly, and from the object itself, the aesthetic quality is revealed. Not so in African art. According to the African value system, an object is of no value, of very little value. What matters is the magic word put into it. The piece of wood becomes a piece of meaning through designation, through the meaning which is put into the piece of art. It is the same in African thinking with the human being, which, as long as it has no name, is not a human being. A baby born which dies before having a name is just thrown away and will not get a funeral. Only after it has been designated to be a human being by a name, it will get a funeral. Same with a piece of art. The piece of wood only gets its value through the meaning put into it and made visible by the artist. The piece of wood itself has no value. The designation can be drawn out again if a piece of wood is not in use anymore, if it has been substituted by another piece of wood, the carved piece of wood is thrown away. In African traditional culture, you have no museum, no conservation of a piece of wood because of its aesthetical value. Out of function, it loses its meaning and can be thrown away. So, art in Africa is not an object. Art is something what happens. Art is an attitude. Art is an action and reveals itself only in action. The mask at the wall in a museum is just a piece of wood. The mask becomes art only in the moment when the masked dancer uses it during his dance. Masks are not even shown as long as they are not in function. They are stored away and hidden, and only during the moment of performance they are used, and they reveal then art. So it's a completely different aspect as we have to look into African art. And when we show it now as objects, we should never forget that this is not an African approach to it. Now we can start with the first slide. When you look at African art, the first important notion is that there are typical proportions. The head is oversized, the feet are oversized, the legs are rather short and unimportant, the body is stretched. Here on the one side, Benin in Nigeria, the other side, Senufo, Ivory Coast. What is represented in African art is here in African sculpture, and I make a distinction between sculpture and masks, is the Muntu being, the Muntu force. All human beings are Muntu forces. Muntu forces are those forces which can think, which have the power over the magic word Muntu. As they can think, they are the head, to the head is given all importance, and because they are linked to the soil, to the ancestors, the feet have a special importance too. So the first determinant of African sculpture is to show that the designation is that of a Muntu force. The face shows no naturalistic traits. It is a conventional face, we might say. It is a special face. It is a face which shows that this Muntu force includes life before death and existence after death. The face is given in an eternal expression linked to the ancestors, evidently showing the ancestor of the group. So every tribe has a particular Muntu face, always a face of strong concentration, an example how to behave in religious action. Next two, please. On the left-hand side, Luba, Eastern Congo. On the right-hand side, Mali, Dogon in Mali. Very far from each other. Both cases, as in the other two, you see that the proportions are the same, the concentration in the faces is the same. This kind of proportion has worried the observers very much, and it has long been looked for an explanation. In a book published in 1963, Professor Himmelheber in Heidelberg still thought that he had found a solution for this typical African proportion. And he writes, probably it must be like this, that the African artist is standing too near to his object. And when you see a person in front of you too near, you see his head big, and when you look down, you do not see the legs, but see the feet. this kind of explanation still offered in 1963. The proportion is one of the most important determinants. I speak of determinants because a term like this can include proportions and symbols. Next, please. Left Yoruba, on the right Benin again. We have here a Muntu being on a horse. Every African knows that a horse is rather bigger than the horses are here. But as in African value system, horses belong in the Kintu group, in the group of objects of little value. They have to be smaller than a rider, than a Muntu being. So here again, proportion expresses the ontological rank. The horse as such is not even meant and represented. It is not more than a determinant, a symbol for the rider, giving him a special kind of status. So here on the right we see a king of Benin. The king is made visible by determinants such as crown, beads around his neck, staff in hand, and sitting on horse. Sculptures can be read down according to these symbols and proportions, reflecting always the ontological rank of the person. Next two, please. On the left-hand side, from mouth of the Niger, you see elephants and elephant hunters. Africans know that elephants are bigger than men. Nevertheless, elephants are Kintu forces, forces of less ontological value. Hunters are Muntu forces, so the hunters have to be bigger than the elephants. On the right-hand side, you see persons in different size. It's a Yoruba sculpture from Ondo in western Nigeria. Here you see a king, the king of Ondo. I know him myself. His face is not his individual face. The individualization, or better, the personification, is given by designation, not by personal features. The face has to be the face of the common ancestor. What gives his individuality is, and his rank precisely, is his crown, the crown being the crown of a king of Ondo. His personal status is expressed on the fan showing his praise name. Behind him, standing, bigger than himself, the Queen Mother, literally supporting the house. The Queen Mother being the person through which his force as a king comes. Wives and servants small around him. If harmony is there as it should be. The social order agrees completely with the ontological order. Here you see that African sculpture, as Neo-African poetry, mostly does not show what is, but what should be. That the expression, what is told, is a normal, a magic word, evocating the order, the harmony of the universe. The next two, please. On the left-hand side, this very famous head of Benin, it was believed by Lushan and others that that is a portrait of a Benin princess, and you still can read that in many books about African art. But it is not a princess and it is not a portrait. It is a queen mother. In her Muntu face, again the conventional face, the necessary face to give both sides before death and the existence after death in one, so always linking past and future. On the right-hand side, you see a mask. It is not a sculpture, it is a mask. The mask is down here, and what is on top of the mask is only a determinant what that mask means. The mask means and represents a Yoruba king whose story is in detail legible. He is on a horse. The horse has the right size. That means it is too small, as it should be. He has a crown. He has around him his vassals, depending on him, his warriors with weapons, guns, and on the right-hand side, even the barrel with gunpowder. Reading down the determinants in detail in connection with the local meaning, you get then what the mask means. The next, please. This gentleman is a piece of Benin art, again, does not show a king. His hat shows that he is a person of importance, but more than that, those horn-like looking details are no horns. They are bodies of tortoises. As the body of a tortoise is not visible, it means that the gentleman uses invisible forces. He is a medicine man. At his neck, in front, he has in the middle a bag with medicine. The force of his medicine visibly coming out of it in shape of a snake. The snake does not mean a snake at all. It is his force, his active force, his normal. Around his neck, you see that he comes of a clan of blacksmiths. You see there the tools of the blacksmith. the hammer, the anvil, and the tongs on his back. On his left arm, he has a recipient for the kernels of the Abba tree, protection against evil. Next, please. In this way, we can read down in detail the meaning and the function. The Muntu face, again, conventional, and when you see several pieces of art of Benin, you will always see that there is one face. But in detail, it looks a little different. There are variations according to the artist. Very remarkable variations which enable the specialist to say of which place and of which family of brass casters or of carvers the work of art comes. Do not forget, if an African looks at Italian Renaissance art, the Muntu face there for him is the same. All look as if having no future, as if not existing after death, because they are all naturalistic, and he will have a big difficulty to distinguish between Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. For us, we find us in the same position, that we still are not able to see at first sight the individual differences and variations in African sculpture when it is with the same Muntu face of one group. The next, please. These sculptures show now not Muntu beings before and after death. They show Muntu beings Muntu forces of higher rank. Every African knows that a human being has 2 feet and not 5, as he on the left. This is Susu. On the right, that's from Congo. On the right, Ashanti. Also a different expression. Fertility sculptures used to provoke fertility when a girl as a daughter is wanted, or a daughter is wanted. Here, the less a face is human in expression, and not only the face, the higher in the hierarchy is the Muntu force represented. The next, please. Head-foot sculptures. On the left, Senufo from Ivory Coast. On the right, Bakuba of Gabon. Same kind of expression. No body, but face and feet, the most essential for these parts of these higher spirits. Higher up in rank, on the right-hand side, again, a fertility symbol, the moon on top of the sculpture. So again, higher rank, different tribes, far from each other, but with the same meaning. The next, please. So far, we have seen sculptures of Muntu fossil. The mask is something different. The sculpture shows Muntu in the unity before and after death, in an eternal expression. Masks show either a living person as a mask on the right-hand side, or they show a deceased person or spirit. The masked dancer cannot at the same time dance a living person and a deceased person or deified person, a spirit. Because the deceased person, the spirit, has a specific voice, a specific behavior, which in dance is expressed. So we have two different kinds of masks. One I call Muzzammil Masks on the right-hand side, those representing beings and forces before death. And on the left-hand side, Muzzammil Masks, masks representing forces after death or spirits. Most spirits are deceased beings, human beings, having been deified, having been raised in the rank of Muntu forces to a higher and higher rank by designation. A mask is only a mask in action, and that's why I show these two examples first. A mask alone is an object without value. Only in action, African art reveals itself. The next, please. These masks, Mpangwe, Gabon, same tribe. Here you see again the variation inside the same type. No masks representing white people or Chinese. They are deceased ladies. White is the color of death. In initiation rites, boys or girls are often painted white because they have to die and to be reborn into full life. So white as color can be applied also to living persons for the time of their initiation while they pass through the period of spiritual death to be reborn with a new name, with a new designation. These ladies have died not a long time ago. Human features are still precisely recognizable. The family can get into contact with them. The masked dancer will be asked, will receive a present. He will, with a specific rhythm, put himself into action, into motion, into emotion, into ecstasies, up to the point that the spirit of the deceased person is entering into him, he will be the medium and speak to the family with the voice of a deceased person and giving the message. Next, please. I said before that we have to read down the symbols in particular, and that these meanings are then quite become clear. Here all the group of masks, which we will see here and in the next slides, are all with horns and all are fertility masks. The rank of the specific spirits is rising now, white being used as a color of death, more and more dehumanizing the features as the rank of the mask of the represented spirit is higher and higher. The two possibilities are that the dehumanization is done by shifting over more and more into an animal-like face or into abstraction. In both cases, the same is meant. Spirit, thinking beings. No animal is represented in African art. No animal ever means an animal if it appears. On the right-hand side, you see it goes over into an animal face, but still the nose is there. The next, please. Here, left-hand side going more into animal-like face, like a bull. On the right-hand side going more into abstraction. But in both cases, it is not an animal. It is a spirit, a thinking and speaking and acting spirit. Still, white color applied for the region of death and the region of the spirits. The next two, please. On the left-hand side, in this Mama mask of Nigeria, no face anymore, rather gone into abstraction, and horns as symbol of fertility, a high spirit, two forms joined together by designation having a name of a specific spirit. On the right-hand side, you see the influence of African art in the Western world. A sculpture by Picasso, a handle of a bicycle, and a saddle of a bicycle, and the designation is bull's head. The behavior as such, to give by designation a meaning, is either the same as in Africa, but nevertheless, the bull's head of Picasso could not be an African sculpture, because an African sculpture couldn't mean a bull's head. The designation in the African sense is wrong. The influence of African art in the Western world is more in the attitude how art is considered than in the detail by taking over specific forms. In traditional Western art, the object matters and mattered. But now we find artists in the West who say, well, I'm not interested so much in what I really paint. I'm only interested in the process of painting. I'm feeling it myself. Certainly an attitude not traditional Western. The next two, here again, the same. On the left-hand side, a combination of horns, rather going into abstract, Susu, Congo, with a kind of chameleon on top, not meaning chameleon and not meaning horns. On the right-hand side, the famous Bambara antelope, not being an antelope, and never meaning an antelope. It is the top of a mask. The mask is left away when it is put into a European museum. That's the way Western culture understands African art, seeing in it the expression of an antelope, but the antelope, as I said, is not meant. The animal in African art is used like the animal in a fable, where the fox means slyness, the lion means strength, the snake means wisdom, and so here the antelope means magic force. The medicine man in many cases carries his medicine in antelope horns. The Ashanti gold weights, where you see many representations of animals, do not mean animals. They are illustrations to proverbs. And the famous leopards in the palace of Dahomey are no leopards, but illustrations of kings' praise names. I take my prey like a leopard. The next, please, as the last two. I show you now, please, the next. I show you now two Muzzammil masks. I said in Muzzammil masks, representing living persons, there is another possibility. Here on the left-hand side of the Egungun society, the representation, the mocking representation of a foreigner, of a Brazilian. He's smiling. White color is used to say he's already dead in life. Here in Muzzammil masks, where the representation happens of living persons, it is mock representation. It's a kind of a masquerade. The person is either mocked only or mocked and praised. The foreigner, as he is a Brazilian, is only mocked at. On the right-hand side, it's not a foreigner. It's a Gelede mask. It is a person of the own community. So it is mock and praise in one, because mocking alone would take away too much life force of him, it would hurt him. So mocking has to be balanced by praise. The mask on the right-hand side has no white color in the face, is not characterized as being already dead. The mask shows the conventional Muntu face, telling that the person is alive and is represented in his eternal being. On top of the mask, again, the determinant, explaining what the mask means as we had it before. There is the man again, the whole now, sitting on a bicycle with shoes, with short trousers, with a shirt, and with a tropical helmet on top, showing that the gentleman has got a little too much of Western influence. Here, again, a smile on his face, and no symmetry. The gentleman is looking to the side, not himself, as you see. The mask is symmetrical because symmetry is necessary to indicate the eternity, the harmony of the universe. On the right-hand side, you see the individual as such, the man, the person, is seen in the eternal harmony as a Muntu being before and after death. The mask, in the specific case, shows him before death, in his life, with a personal trait. And only this personal trait, which is not the man himself, but only an indication of his behavior, just as the antelope is no antelope, there it is allowed to go out of the symmetry to show a personal trait like smiling and to turn around the head. Thank you. We can put that. What I tried to do is just more than to go into detail to develop a method how we can analyze African art. What we need in detail is to have the specific environment of and the specific meaning of the determinants of the detail. By the precise information given by the fieldwork research in the type of Professor Fagg, we get the keys into detail to analyze African art, but the method should be philosophical. From the detail, we cannot conclude towards higher values. We have to start from the value system to get deeper into African art. There remains one question: what is aesthetics? And where does beauty enter? I have so far only spoken of function and of use. Beauty enters, but from a different side. As in most African languages, good and beautiful are one word and are not distinguished. Beauty is a part of the effectiveness, of the radiance of African art in the process of happening. What matters in first line is a function, is a use. But if a group, a society, needs a carver for carving a mask or a sculpture for a precise purpose, they will go and try, if they can afford it, to find the better one. Because the better the mask or the sculpture is made, the more it will be effective. So, aesthetics are not excluded. They are a part of the function. I thank you, and I can take other questions.
Mr. Jahn would be quite glad to answer any question you would like to ask him.
Yes, please.
Is the classification of Kitu as multi-forces universal and Africa? And is it accepted by Africans recognize it? Or is it your more or less arbitrary classification?
It's mine. It is this. The value system, which I only partly used here as a vocabulary, is in this coherent as a kind of inherent grammar in sub-Saharan culture. Every culture has a specific value system of its own, which is a kind of a grammar, and whether it is known by the individual of the group is not necessary. You speak English without necessarily knowing the grammar of English. It becomes only necessary to know the value system in one's own culture if we start comparing it with another one. Even the Western world has not questioned the values of its own culture unless the Western world was confronted to compare it with other cultures. So, but the terminology as such is given by Alexis Kagame in his book La philosophie bantou-rwandaise des lettres. He describes here, he has given the vocabulary and describes what it means in his own society. And what I have done is only trying to compare whether values system in other African communities agree or disagree with it. And they agree. And so I just use these terms in general, as we usually do. If we need a new term, we just take one of some language and then use it wherever we can apply it. Yes, please.
Well, for instance, if we were to take a major Western value system such as existentialism and to criticize diverse paintings such as Dali or Distal or Rouault or any number of European paintings by it, both the proponents of the philosophical system, the followers of the artist, probably would object because they would say that we had been less than complete in understanding what they were doing. How could one just justify the use of this Bantu concept, which is subtle and sophisticated, in other cultures such as the Dogon or Bambara, which are in some ways diametrically opposed philosophically to the Bantu?
Well, I would not say that they are diametrically opposed. We now got into the discussion about the value system, which I would have to outline now, you see, but that takes a whole lecture, let's say. How we can generalize in values is if we found evidence for it. And the legitimity to do so here, to analyze with it, is if we get a little further in the meaning. I do not think that we have so far gone very far, but I display it here as a method. Of course, the value system of the Dogon should not be mixed up with the mythology of the Dogon. Religion and mythology can be very different and based in the same value system. Value systems are relations of values. That means here, in the specific case of art, that art is not considered to be an object in comparison to Western art. And that holds for Dogon as it holds for Bantu, as it holds for Congo and Senufo. And this is reflected in the proportions of the, as I've shown. So far it holds as a value system. More does a value system not say. If we get into minor values, the inside hierarchies of values then in detail, then we will have and remark the differences between the different people, which are then reflected in the value system as well in minor value details. We have in a value system one big hierarchy and has minor hierarchies inside, and so on. And here might be differences. Why? This I generalize for sub-Saharan Africa, and here might be inside very big differences. If we know them in detail and study them, we get an explanation, we get a meaning into further detail. And that has still has to be done, and it's very difficult to get every step ahead. Certainly, every method like this is not more than a tool. And there is an end where we have to stop with the finding out until we then apply another theory. But without a theory, we just cannot do. I think that having no theory is the most dangerous theory at all. That means we have not even questioned our preliminaries and carry around our prejudices. Please.
You indicated that there was a difference in that the Africans did not consider art as an object, but I'm a little bit confused on this because it would seem to me that the might be that whereas for us a work of art would be an object to be appreciated in itself, whereas for them a work of art would be an object to be appreciated for its functional usefulness, but it would still be an object.
Of course. Yes, you're quite correct. The art could be, in the terminology of the value system, be expressed as a nomo being, which means the magic word, being made visible in kintu, in objects. But as soon as I draw the nomo out, and here lies the emphasis, we are always speaking of emphasis in value systems, then what remains when the meaning is taken out is then meaningless, and then not art, thrown away. While that does not happen in Western culture. And here's an essential difference. Yes?
Are modern Africans beginning to look upon their past art as objects, for instance, in the New Africa? I know there are a lot of museums being built.
Yes. Well, at least there is a discovery of the material value of these objects, and they are traded, as you know, and you can buy them, and they know that Europeans like to buy them, and so they have got a commercial value as objects. But still, they have then lost for those who deal with it a meaning as art. You can prove that easily by the price of these objects is not according to their value of art. airport art ranks high, if you know what I mean by it, just a kind of industrialization. And I know carvers who do traditional African art and at the same time make obscene figures for commercial use and selling to tourists, or just a kind of airport art as you usually see it in airports displayed. The difference is very remarkable. The one is sold and the other is made for use in cults. I remember when I tried, I was in Abeokuta and I saw by one of those carvers who have a big workshop for tourist art, a wonderful esho in the traditional way made. On the one side, in the workshop, it went very quickly, and the tourist art was turned out in series. And this one, he spent weeks on it, carving it. And I tried to get that. That was very difficult. He didn't want to sell it at all. And he did not, he said, that is needed, this is for a society having ordered this. That was the only piece which really had a meaning to him. And I tried to convince him just to give me that one when it's finished, because he could do another one for the society. Well, finally I got it, but specifically for rather nothing. Then it was a present to me, because here it kept a meaning. Yes?
What was the social position of the carver? Is he an important person or just an artisan?
In the tradition, the carvers were carvers' families who had around them who handed on their skill through generations, especially to sons. But if the son wasn't able to do it, they took apprentices to whom they taught this. Their social position was important, and they were, in general, paid and by the kings, because there, especially, the kings needed for their representation in house posts and their representation, they needed the carvers. On the other hand, they were paid too by the secret societies needing the carver. In modern times, this has changed a little, and as the kings were put out of power, they had not the means to maintain artists. For a period of transition, in some regions the Catholic Church has taken over and tried to make these carvers go on, allowing them even to continue to work for African cults. The success was not very big. On the other hand, now the tourism has helped them a lot. They just split themselves. They make tourist art for tourists or become carpenters, and the best of them continue to make good African art. Certainly, African art changes too, because the world changes, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there are Neo-African artists, Neo-African sculptors, who do a new kind of art, which is based on this tradition on the one side, and shows evidently Western influence. Yes, please.
I was wondering if you would consider the French peasant as collecting religious works for their aesthetic or their functional value. Does he consider a statue of a saint that he would put in his home something that has a functional value or something that is of aesthetic value?
Here, too, I would say, of a functional value. You see, we have nothing, and that is the basis of the value system, in African culture, which does not exist as well in Western culture, and vice versa. But the emphasis is different. It is not the majority of Western art which is considered as function. It is certainly only a small part of African art which can be considered as object. The difference is not that exclusively it's on only one side. No, it is only a difference of emphasis, and that's all what a value system can do. What it helps us to know this is to get deeper into meaning. More I do not want to find out. Yes, please.
You mentioned that one of the last slides was that of a Brazilian.
Is
You mentioned one of the last sculptures being that of a Brazilian.
yes.
Important.
Yes, you know that very many Afro-Brazilians have come back to West Africa and have a specific social role as merchants in West African society. They are culturally important too. And their specific behavior is here in this case, represented. But you see, these Muzzammil masks have a very local meaning often, because it's really an individual which is represented there. And so you have to know the story behind it, which I do not know, to say in particular why this gentleman, who was even smiling, is represented like this. In this group of masks, you can even have Prince Philip and Queen Elizabeth. Foreigners are specially made for fun and entertainment. Are there more questions?